Right, guys, great to have you with us. Before we get to Gail, before we go through some of the stats and take on looking ahead, let's look back. Bayern, how disappointing was that for them?
Really disappointing, wasn't it? Really disappointing. I mean, remember, Bayern were the bookmakers' second favourites to win this tournament before last night, but it was another really disappointing performance after that defeat to Bayer Leverkusen in the Bundesliga. Tuchel had spoken before about the team playing with a weight on their backs almost at the moment, given all the pressure they've been under. And it really did look like that, didn't it, in the game? They were quite slow, quite an unimaginative performance, 60% of the possession, but no real chances created, at least no clear chances. I mean, defensive vulnerability as well, wasn't there? A big individual error, of course, from Upamecano for the penalty, but the passage of play was bad. It was collectively, it was a really poor goal to concede, the way Lazio just cut straight through them. So a very disappointing night for them again.
Yeah, and for you, Sam, were you expecting more from them because there was that very disappointing result at the weekend? You expected to come out firing and have a response to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a very poor, and another very poor evening for Bayern Munich. I mean, Thomas Müller gave an interview to Sky Germany after the Leverkusen game and almost gave a rallying cry and said, it's not the manager, it's the players. The players have to take responsibility. And last night it felt that Bayern, who started Müller, they started well, they started sharp, created chances, but as the game went on, as the game continued to be 0-0, they just lost that little bit of confidence. And as Nick said, the weight was on their back, and Tuchel was on the sidelines at about 60 minutes, and he just still couldn't believe what he was seeing, even though the score was still 0-0. And it just feels like a Bayern Munich side that they don't look like they're going for two trophies this season, the Bundesliga and the Champions League.
Well, Gail, I mean, goodness me, they're going to need to improve their threat in front of goal, certainly, aren't they?
Yeah, for the second game in a row, Bayern Munich really did struggle up front. No shots on target for the Bayer Leverkusen game. And if we look at the attacking threat yesterday, no shots on target then either. I mean, Harry Kane's got his head in his hands, hasn't he? It wasn't a particularly good night for him either. If we take a look at his involvement last night, well, we know, we talked on Sunday about just the 18 touches in that 3-0 defeat to Leverkusen. 31 last night, but only 3 in the opposition box. Take-ons completed, none in the last 2 games, no shots on target, and pressures 1 in the final third. And the other stat that we looked at a little bit earlier is passes completed as well. Well down on what we expect, because yes, we expect goals from Harry Kane, but we also expect him to bring other people into the game as well. And there are a number of contributing factors to this, aren't there? They have got a few big players missing, Bayern, and perhaps Leroy Sané, not the player he was a few months ago.
Yeah, what do you reckon, Sam?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Kane benefits from pace out wide, doesn't he? And you've got the likes of Kingsley Coman, Serge Gnabry, Alphonso Davies all out injured at the moment. And as Gail said, there is a drop in Leroy Sané's form. He started the season with 8 goals in his first 9 Bundesliga games. Then he went on a run of 10 assists in 9 league games. And now, compare it to now, no goals from his last, no goals and 1 assist in his last 6 matches. So you can definitely point to a lack of service for Kane, definitely, especially in those wider areas.
I think service definitely has been an issue, hasn't it? But at the same time, it's hard to be too critical, isn't it? Because we are talking about a player who scored 28 goals in 29 games this season. You know, Tuchel has got the best out of him this season. It's more of a dip, I'd say, than indicative of what's happened this season. He is using him slightly differently as well to how he was used at Spurs. Obviously, we were used to him dropping deep and linking the play and playing passes in behind at Spurs. He doesn't do that as much at Bayern generally. You know, there are fewer touches from him, fewer passes, but at the same time, more shots, more touches in the opposition box. So although he's perhaps not as involved generally in their play, he is more effective in terms of goal scoring. I guess the problem he has is that when he's not scoring, he does look a little more isolated and he's not doing those other things. So that's a problem for him at the moment, I think.
Yeah, good points. Speaking of which, 5 points behind Leverkusen in the Bundesliga. Do we now think Thomas Tuchel is under pressure, Gail?
Well, I think we've seen a couple of glimpses of the maybe negative body language we've seen before, haven't we, at the likes of Chelsea and Dortmund when things aren't going well. I think he's also suffering from the managerial superstar. He's certainly in the shadows of Xabi Alonso this season, isn't it? Let's have a look at his losses so far. And he has lost 10 games since he took over. That's in 43 games that he's been in charge of. And when you look at Julian Nagelsmann, who was obviously dismissed before Tuchel took over, he also lost 10 games, but in 84 matches that he oversaw. Bayern don't like losing matches. They don't like losing Bundesligas. And you just wonder when you look at that and how Julian Nagelsmann was sort of dismissed, maybe in some people's eyes a little bit too early, what the future then lies for Thomas Tuchel.
Yeah, it's not the only similarity there is with Julian Nagelsmann. If you go back to 11 months ago, Nagelsmann was sacked by Bayern after a defeat to Bayer Leverkusen, and they were also second in the Bundesliga table. So there's massive pressure on Tuchel at the moment, especially when with someone like Xabi Alonso, who used to play for Bayern Munich, of course, and reportedly has this clause in his contract that he can leave Leverkusen to one of his former clubs. He would be top of Bayern Munich's list if they were to let Tuchel go. But I think one key point is that Bayern sacked Nagelsmann during the March international break. So I think that's a good sort of time reference point for us to look at. If Tuchel hasn't turned it around by then, I think it might be pretty inevitable.
And he'll be wanting to turn it around before they get to playing Lazio as well, and give them, an upturn in form in the league with these 3 games as well before the second leg to fit in 3 wins. And I'll actually go into that feeling a bit of confidence to try and turn that round.
Yeah, a very important run of games for them, isn't it? I mean, I guess the positive is that they are only 1 goal down in this tie. Even in the Bundesliga, a 5-point gap is not necessarily fatal, is it? They can still claw this back. They really need to regain their confidence. And these 3 games aren't necessarily the easiest, so it's not going to be straightforward. Bochum, of course, near the drop zone, but they've only lost 1 of their last 5. You've got RB Leipzig, who beat them in the Super Cup earlier this season, held them to a 2-2 draw as well in September. And then you've got Freiburg, who okay, they've lost their last 3, but another good team, only lost twice at home this season. So tricky games for them, but really, really important ones for them too.
Yeah, we've seen, haven't we, big names, important names missing, but one real positive for Bayern was the performance of youngster Jamal Musiala, Gail.
Yeah, he did have something a bit different from the rest of the side that looked a little bit flat and particularly slow in that midfield area. And when you look at his performance last night and also appearances before the age of 21, he's in pretty impressive company, isn't he? 20 Champions League appearances, the likes of Jude Bellingham, maybe you'd expect Kylian Mbappe. Thomas Rosicky, the one that we raised our eyebrows to a little bit earlier this morning, but in exceptional company. And they have relied on him so much this season, and they will certainly need him to put in a performance of which the others would be proud of, I think, for that second leg in a couple of weeks' time.
Goodness me. OK, so yes, you look at that. Great to have these youngsters in the side, isn't it, as well? They used to call him Bambi, didn't they? But at 6 foot, he's sort of grown into this man overnight, hasn't he, Sam? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, Musiala was a great positive last night. I think that we were talking earlier about sort of, supply to Kane from wide areas, and you did feel that Kane's best chances did come when Musiala not necessarily put the ball in, but sort of beat a man and sort of managed to managed to supply a pass for a cross. So, yeah, I think he's a top player, and look, he's in great company there, as Gail said.
He is. And speaking of which, Kylian Mbappe on that list. His goal set Paris Saint-Germain on their way to a 2-0 win over Real Sociedad. It might sound routine, but actually Real Sociedad, when you look at them, had only conceded twice in 6 group games. So, I mean, a good win for the French champions?
Yeah, very good. And by contrast, PSG, of course, were pretty unconvincing in the group stage, weren't they? They sort of scraped through in second place, only won 2 of their 6 games. Of course, got beaten 4-1 by Newcastle as well. So, no, a really good win. They'll be pleased to avoid any major dramas in that game, having gone out of the last 16 in the last 2 years. So, yeah, they'll be hoping maybe they can do something this year, and it's certainly a good start to the knockout stages for them.
Yeah, I do think it was a good time for PSG to play Real Sociedad as well. They're really struggling in front of goal. They're now without a goal in 5 matches in all competitions, and they're really missing Mikel Oyarzabal.
Good
get that right. Thank you very much. He brings goals from midfield, basically. And it felt like a big win for PSG's young players. Obviously, the PSG president has been speaking a lot about bringing a young sort of building a young squad, a French squad, and you see the likes of Warren Zaire-Emery, Bradley Barcola, who scored last night. They're getting on the goal. He's getting in amongst the goals. I can't see PSG going all the way this season, but I can see the end of this project resulting in them competing for the Champions League if they manage to keep those talented young players.
Yeah.